You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Mary today. Mary's an individual that reached out to me from the great state of Oklahoma with some interesting things that she's experienced over the years. So, Mary, it's great to have you on the show today.
Nice to be here.
Absolutely. We were talking a little bit beforehand, and it sounds like we'll definitely be getting into some interesting things. Feel free to take us back to when all this interesting stuff happened to you in your life.
I think the first time I'd actually experienced anything Bigfoot-wise was when I was growing up on Grand Lake, and I lived with my grandmother, and we would pick huckleberries in the summertime, and we would be out in the woods, and we would hear strange knocks or just strange noises that didn't sound like normal wildlife noises. And anytime we would hear them, she'd be like, okay, we need to move to this area, or we need to start thinking about moving back out. And I would ask her why, and she'd be like, well, they don't like us being around. And that was what she left it at. You're young, you don't ask questions. But you learned to listen for the knocks, and then at times you would hear the whooping. And during certain times of the year, there would be a lot of it, a lot of activity of the whooping and knocks late at night, especially early summers. There was always seemed to would increase, and you could go out into the woods and you would see, footprints sometimes, or you'd see tree branches down where yesterday they had been just fine. You would see where the undergrowth was kind of pushed. I remember finding areas where the berries were just picked bare, but over in another area they were fine. And there was all kinds of I want to say at that time I felt like it was weird, but you just got used to it. You learned to listen for the knocks, you learned to listen for whoops. If you heard any of that, you didn't, stay in that area, you moved. And while I was young, the first time I actually saw one, my grandmother, myself, and her best friend, who was a devout Christian, never said bad words, didn't do anything wrong. I didn't think she'd be the type to believe in a Bigfoot. We were out on this one ridge. It was really way back into the woods, I'd say 2 to 3 miles, almost to the lake. And we were standing there, and we looked across the holler, and I saw something up in the cave across from the holler in the bluff. And she was standing there beside me looking in that direction. I'm like, do you see what I see? Because I wasn't going to tell her if she wasn't going to say I wasn't seeing. I knew what I was seeing was there was a Bigfoot standing there. And she goes, yeah, I think that's a Bigfoot. And I was like, it is a Bigfoot. And she goes, it's looking at us. I'm like, yeah. And she goes, we might need to, move out of this area where they can't see us. Because it was just staring at us. There was a bigger one. And then when we were moving backwards, we glanced back, and there was 2 others, 2 smaller ones up in there. And we went to go find my grandmother and bring her over to show her, and they were gone. And at that point, my grandmother goes, we need to leave. And as I got older, my grandmother said that she had been taught when she was little that you just, if you hear them or see something of them, leave. Just go back the way you came. They won't bother you as long as you're not messing with them or in the area where they're at. You would get used to seeing like tree limbs that are too high up for a person to knock down or pull down. I would say pull because it didn't really look like they were knocked over. It looked like they were deliberately broken along paths, and it looked like they were along game paths where you would see the deers and stuff come through. I know the one thing I did notice was there's a huge spring down on Grand Lake. It's called the Great Spring. The Indians used it because it was a wonderful water source. The water there is so pure and fresh tasting. It's amazing. But you could always see where they were around it. You could see the footprints of it, and footprints would go back up the hills. And you could, when you got down there, it's just a different feeling in that area. It's like you felt that they were watching to see what you were going to do. But I was never really scared of them because it just wasn't something. It was just, oh, they're here. Pay attention for them. You know, they would get loud at night. You know, you could hear them doing the knocks and the whoops really loud during the summer times. Fall and winter wasn't too bad, but summer was the main time we heard them. And we'd see glimpses here, there, and yonder. Through the years, you would just see like silhouettes of them.
The footprints that you saw over the years, how long would you estimate those footprints to be?
Goodness, definitely bigger than a size 13.
Okay, wow.
Some smaller. I had seen some through the years that was probably, I would say, about a woman's size 4 or 5. Okay. You know, like they were young, but the big ones were definitely over a 13. You know, like a 12 to 13. My boys were 12s, and they were definitely bigger than that.
The area that we're talking about, this Grand Lake area, what county is that?
It's in Delaware County. Grand Lake of the Cherokees is the lake was actually built. They call it Grand Lake of the Cherokees because it was actually built over the Cherokee Indians where they burial mounds are, or used to be. They tried to get as many up and moved as they could, but they did miss some. And so they just come to refer to it as Grand Lake over the Cherokees. And then they shortened it through the years to Grand Lake of the Cherokees. That's what I was told by my grandmother, who was actually there when the lake was built. The original town is still under the water. They just literally flooded it. Once they built out where they wanted the lake to go, they flooded over it.
I'm assuming there's probably been a ton of Bigfoot sightings beside yours in that area as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. My sister-in-law experienced them through the years. My nephews have. My cousins. If you go out into the woods hunting up there, you're going to hear them if you don't see them. Just last year, there was a woman on Facebook. She's like, what in the world am I hearing? She goes, it sounds like weird Indian drums. And we're all like, okay, that's just the Bigfoots knocking. You know, just leave it alone. They'll be fine. You're not going to die. It's okay. Because she was freaking out about it. She thought something really strange was going on. I think my grandmother said she first remembered hearing about them as early as when some of her ancestors had settled in the area, and they come off the Trail of Tears. And she said it was just, you know, they've always been there, she felt like. I know there's one thing I noticed and was weird to me was we had actually seen one year, we went out and there was a cabin. It used to be an old bootleg cabin. Bootleggers would stay in it and do their little moonshine stills and stuff in there. Anyway, I was out there exploring one day, and I thought, oh, I'm going to go and see, you know, what's in this thing. I go inside, and there's a big nest in the building. Like they had actually discovered they could use the building as protection from the elements, and they built a big nest in there. And it stunk so bad. Oh my goodness, did it stink. I remember coming out of there thinking, oh, that's worse than a skunk. It was so bad because the smell is just, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just awful. And even today, where I live at now, if I am out and I smell that, I'm like, oh, okay, they're around here somewhere. Because once you smell it, you don't forget it.
What materials was the nest made out of?
Brush, leaves, mainly. I think there was a little bit of maybe pine stuff in it, but it was mostly brush and leaves. I would say about the size of a love seat and diameter and like width.
Wow.
Yeah, it was decent sized. It was a decent sized thing. And I thought it was cool, but once I told my grandmother, she's like, nope, you're staying out of there.
You're out of there. So this is a weird one, but did you get close enough to see what specific type of brush was used in the nest?
To me, it looked like young oak saplings.
Okay.
Brush, because up in that area is mainly the brush would be oak or walnut. About that material. That's mainly what's out there is oak and walnut trees. Some elm, but not much. But that's what it looked like it was. And then, like I said, the pine, there was pine needles, and they might have took some pine limbs off.
Wow.
So
that's very, very interesting, especially the part where it's inside.
See, that's what threw me, was because before then I had seen, where you could tell where they had knocked trees over to kind of make a protection. And I know that they have been in the caves from seeing the one in the cave, obviously, but also the Great Spring has a cave behind it, and it was common knowledge that something large lived in there and you didn't go in there. And so we're like, okay, what would be in there that's large? And I asked one of my cousins, I'm like, well, is it the panther? And he goes, no, it's not the panther. I'm like, oh, okay. And I left it at that because I knew what he was talking about if it's not the panther.
The legend was that people would see a large creature then, and in that area of the cave. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. They would see it in the cave. I think, I don't know who, but there was a story that I heard from my dad that some kids went down in there and came hauling butt out and never went back.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, I didn't try it myself because I can't swim. So I was not, and to get to the cave, you have to go through the water. And obviously I wasn't going to do that if I can't swim because it's a very deep spring.
Oh.
It's a natural spring. Yes.
So I get it now. So this is a cave behind the waterfall. You had to swim through the waterfall.
There's no waterfall.
Oh,
there's no waterfall.
Okay.
It's a big spring about the size, oh goodness, of a 30 by 30 house.
Wow.
That's how it's big around. I mean, it's a huge spring. And it fed into Grand Lake, and behind it was the cave, and you'd have to go through the spring to get up into the cave.
Okay. That's wild. When you had the sighting, were you close enough that you were able to notice any details about what you saw, or?
I could just tell that the one of them was tall, very tall, and then two smaller ones. I could tell that they did have the long hair. It looked like reddish brown to me. But I was a holler away from them. I couldn't tell close-up features, but you could tell what they were because it was daytime. It was like maybe we went out at 6. It got out there about 7:30. It was mid-morning, so it was probably about 10 or 11 when we saw them. Because I remember after that, she's like, we're coming home, and it's a long walk back out. And it's on an old wagon trail.
Have there ever been any reports in that area of aggressive encounters?
I've heard of some, but I don't know if that was actual. I don't think they were physical, but they were scary. I know I've heard of hunters coming out just scared to death of something they've heard or seen in there, but they won't talk about it.
Right.
We've noticed dogs, the hunting dogs, would come hauling out for no apparent reason. You can tell when they're around too, because you don't hear as much wildlife. It's like the wildlife stays more quiet.
Does anyone ever report any like weird communication or hearing any like language type stuff or anything like that in the area?
I hadn't heard anything. I don't know if anyone else has on that. They've never really said. I know most of what we heard was always just the whoops and the knocks. Now, you could hear some knocks. You'd hear like a series of knocks followed by whoops, and then they'd knock again. And you could tell they were coming from different areas. You know, you could tell if you stand out there and listen, you could tell like if one's to the right of you and then from the left, they would respond.
Okay. So you had situations where you were having multiple talking to or something communicating through knock patterns all around you.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yes. Yeah. That's common, especially in the early evenings. I was always out in the woods. They're definitely up there. They travel through this area regularly. I know today they still have people hearing them and seeing them. And
just so listeners know what we're looking at here. So we're in the northeast corner of Oklahoma here, which is over by the Ozarks, right?
Yeah, there's areas where it's very heavily wooded, not a lot of people. There's caves that go distances in there. I know it's closed up now, but there used to be a cave that did run from what is now Grove and come out on the south side of Grove up on a hill. And you can actually, when the water goes down, you can see the one cave entrance.
Wow.
But the other side is now under a parking lot. So I know the caves run through, and that could be one way where they're getting from one area to the other is through the caves. And I know there's caves down there people have not been in because they're up on hillsides or they're just too far to get to very easily.
There's a question I want to ask you, mainly for just my own curiosity, because of the geography of the area that this is. A factor I've seen come up in different areas that are like yours. Are there also reports of other things besides Bigfoot that would also be considered similar creatures in that same area?
There's skeelies.
What's that?
A skeelie is like a little, they call them little people.
Okay.
But there's little creatures. You'll hear them, see them occasionally. There is definitely a lot of paranormal activity ghost-wise. That's just something else you get used to seeing and hearing. That's just part of it. There's panthers up in there. There's black panthers. Bears. I personally haven't seen any aliens up in there, but I've heard a couple of people swear they've seen them. I do know, you see weird lights occasionally. So just something that's unexplained.
Those are all things that I was not expecting to just come up. That's pretty intense.
I grew up around there, so I'm used to it. I live in a haunted house. I'm used to it.
Okay. What was it like growing up in an area where there's everything from little people to ghosts to Black Panthers, aliens, Bigfoot?
For me, it was normal.
Okay.
For me, it was absolutely normal because I was just raised up that it's part of what's up there. It's just around you. Accept it and they won't mess with you if you don't mess with them. You know, if you don't show no aggression towards them, or, you know, and you acknowledge they're there, then you're fine. You know, that's just the way my grandmother taught me. And so I've always had the acceptance of it. So it's not like I moved in and I'm like, oh no, what am I dealing with? I always knew what I was dealing with. And so it never bothered me. I mean, I ran free all over those woods. And I was a kid growing up in the 80s, and I was all over the place up in there. Never fazed me a bit to be out in the middle of nowhere by myself with them. Even today, you know, you accept it and deal with it and go on.
Did you ever have any interactions with the Skeelys that you know of?
No. Thankfully, they chose to leave me alone because they're mischievous little things. But my cousins have told stories about them, you know, stealing their stuff and putting it in different spots or terrorizing them. But thankfully, they chose to leave me alone. I think it's just because I'm like, whatever.
Right. Is this another name for the Fae, do you think? Have you ever heard that term?
I think so.
Yeah.
I believe so. Because Skeely is an Indian term, from what I've understood. And so it very well could be to me. It makes perfect sense.
Okay. So you mentioned you've lived in a haunted house, which is, I'm sure you have all sorts of weird stories to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got, I lived in a haunted house growing up. Through the years, we've lived on the one where now is currently haunted. So, you know, it's fun. When I was growing up, where we lived at was on the old wagon trail. It was on the actual settlers trail. My family farm was one of the first farms actually put as a farm when Indians got land. And there was numerous areas where you could have cold spots or you'd see just a white figure. There was an old cabin that it had to have had something to do with cowboys or something, because when it's rainy nights and thunderstorming, if you stand outside to where the cabin used to be, you can hear the bottles clanking, and you can hear, it sounds like they're playing cards. Whoa. And you can't hear what they're saying, but you hear the chatter, the little mummers. You can't make out what they're saying, but you can hear them. And then also in that same area, and this is also, you know, this is all in the same area where you have the sightings and stuff, there's an Indian. You'll see an Indian, he's got a headdress on, and he's tall, very solemn looking, but we call him the guardian because he'll watch you while you're out in the woods, and you'll see him ever so often. And it's just like he's there making sure you get in and out of the woods okay. And he just sits and watches. So we just call him the guardian. That's what my cousins and I grew up calling him.
And you've seen that yourself personally?
Yes.
How tall would you say that is?
About 6 foot.
Yeah.
5'8" to 6 foot. Very tall, very solemn, weathered face. You know, even though it was, you know, obviously white, you could still see the weathering. You could still tell he was very old.
When you say that there are reports of aliens in this area, are you saying more like UFO encounters, or there's actually like aliens being seen?
Well, the two guys I went to high school with swear they saw a UFO. Mm-hmm. They swear to goodness they saw a UFO. Whether they did or not, I don't know. But they were definitely serious about it. And from where I grew up, it would have been about halfway going into Grove, up in another really wooded area, which that area itself is kind of crazy. It's got weird activity. There's a cemetery up there that has the grave of Stan Wadey from the Cherokees. And it's said that if you go to his grave at night and you listen, you can hear a fiddle being played. And I've not got to hear it, but I've had friends that's told me they've heard it. And there's just some very weird stuff over in that area as well.
I can only imagine. There's got to be. Are there situations where these different players have been seen in the same location, like skeely activity with aliens? Do they cross over, or are they usually separate?
I don't know on that part, but I do know that if you go out in the area where the Bigfoots generally were at, when I was younger, you would definitely have some other activity, well, skeely-wise or just other weird. I can't really describe it as anything but weird, because you'd feel an odd sensation that wasn't from the Bigfoot, but you couldn't quite place it at times.
The funny thing is when you started talking about whatever you just said, the phone did some really weird stuff, like someone was trying to mess around with the phone. Do you mind repeating that, what they would do? Like
the skeelies will...
Yeah.
Okay, well, from what my cousin said, they'll either pull pranks on you, or they will terrorize you, like pick on you, like peck on your shoulder, but no one's there, or they take your stuff and move it from one spot to another. You know, especially if you were outside, doing something outside, you'd have a tool beside you, you turn around, look, and it's gone. And then it'd be way over in another spot. That happened to my cousins a lot. I was very thankful they left me alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that stuff like this that was happening to your cousins out there, that would probably follow them home, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes. I do know that there was one time where one summer there was a weird Bigfoot coming through.
Okay.
And I say weird because this one would actually come up and like stare in your windows. Oh. And rattle doors. And it terrorized my nephews something awful an entire summer, to the point where they would sleep in the hallway with their bedroom doors shut, refusing to go in their rooms after dark. It was so bad. And they lived just down the road from me. We found handprints. That would have been in 94.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was pregnant with my first one. So, yeah, 94, 95, somewhere right in that area.
Oh, wow. And you were saying the handprints were being found around the houses as well?
Yes. We found handprints on the window a couple of times. And then our neighbors, the neighbor next to them, had been hearing weird stuff at night, and her dogs were scared to go out. They wouldn't even leave the yard. And usually them things ran all over hell and creation. Cows would be clustered more than normal. So it was definitely weird that year. And that's why we just thought it was a weird one. You know, he was more aggressive than others. But he never actually, hurt anyone, but he was sure terrorizing people.
The one I wanted to ask you about specifically, were there ever any reports of Dogman in that area?
I don't remember any Dogman. I do know I could never get her to describe it, but my daughter was terrorized by what she called the shadow man. And and this was something common again, that different kids in the area, once we got to asking around, had experienced this thing just terrorizing them. And it would scare them to the point they would not leave their parents' side. I mean, we spent 6 months with her right next to us, inside and out, because she swore it could get her. But she would never describe it to us. And none of the other kids that seen it would describe it to us as well. So we don't know for sure what that was. But you could feel when it was around, because it literally felt evil. It felt like it was the worst thing. And you would get really bad, like something bad's going to happen feelings. That's why we thought of it as evil.
So they wouldn't say what it was like?
They wouldn't give us a description.
Okay.
They wouldn't tell us anything.
Wow.
Yeah. And the only time any of us ever saw it was we caught a glimpse once, my cousin and I, because we had raced home. A bunch of the teenagers had been home alone, and they'd seen it and freaked and called us. And we got there, and you could see something with red eyes. But that's all we could tell was the red eyes. It was total blackness.
Were the red eyes higher up or low to the ground, or?
No, they were like maybe, I would say maybe 5'4",
Okay.
5'5". They weren't, they wouldn't be higher up. They wouldn't. To me, it didn't look like it would be a height for anything else. It was definitely weird, though. The eyes were definitely weird.
Wow. There's some really strange things going on in this Delaware County area.
Yes, Delaware County definitely has activity all over in this area of Oklahoma. It really does. Mays County, where I'm at now, is definitely weird and unusual stuff as well. I mean, I've had a Bigfoot sighting down here. This was where my husband actually saw his first Bigfoot. There's a story from back in the 50s that the Army Corps of Engineers actually had a fight with Bigfoots before they built one of the dams down here.
Really?
Yeah. You'd have to give me a couple of days to find my information on that, but I've got some information on it that I have saved from what a friend sent me about it. The story is that they told them, forced them to move, and if they didn't move, then they were going to be killed. And they flooded the area, and now that's Spavinaw Dam is there now.
You've got all the time you need, because I've never heard of that one. That sounds really interesting.
Well, I'll definitely get the information together for you.
Yeah,
because that's one of those ones I'm like, ooh, I want to, dig into that myself.
Wow.
But there's all kinds activity. As I said, there's an auction over here on Highway 412, and my husband and I were there late one evening, and all of a sudden he comes running up to our vehicle, and he's like, get the kids loaded, let's get out of here. And I'm like, why? What's going on? And I noticed the cows were moving, but I had been distracted with kids, so I didn't pay much attention. Well, I glanced up when he said that, and about the time he's telling me, I'm seeing there's a familiar silhouette walking across the field. He goes, I just saw something literally cross that creek in one step. I was like, you mean it stepped once into the creek? He goes, no. He goes, it stood on one side and stepped across two together. We're getting out of here. And I'm like, oh, you just saw a Bigfoot. That's not, because that's right there. And we had to leave immediately. And up to that point, he had never believed in it. But after that, he's like, okay, yep, I'm a believer.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
That's the same county area as Delaware? Or?
No, it's a county over.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just they're connecting counties.
Very, very interesting. If you don't mind me asking, do you have any Native American heritage yourself?
Yes, I do. I have Cherokee, Delaware, and Potawatomi Indian.
Okay, awesome. Wow. It's just I can almost, when I do interviews like this, I can almost bank on the person definitely has some heritage. I mean, it's like every single time. It's incredible. I don't know quite what it is, but there's definitely a connection there, I think.
I think it's because, with us having that background, if you're raised up in it like I was, I was taught the old ways and whatnot, that you're more accepting of it and you're more open to it. So it doesn't bother you as much.
Oh, I agree. I think once you know what to look for, you're going to start to see stuff for sure.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I tell my kids when they're out in the woods, I'm like, okay, keep an eye out. If you hear this or you smell this, you need to be watching and just leave them alone.
The interview kind of turned into something I wasn't expecting. I mean, there's a lot more going on in this area, so we got a little bit distracted, but I think it's definitely worth having the conversation. Are there also other times that you've had what you think are Bigfoot interactions in your life?
Yes, let's see, we had, what year would have been? Around 2000, 2001, somewhere right in that area. I can't remember exactly how old my third child was at that time. We lived up in Coffeyville. We actually lived in South Coffeyville on the Illinois River on a ranch. And so we would go through the hayfield, through this really thick area of trees to go down to a river, which was actually the Illinois River for the kids to swim and whatnot. And you would feel like they're just there watching you. And a couple of times it made my husband so uncomfortable, he actually said, "We're leaving now," because of how intense the feeling felt. But one night we were out there. There was a very bad storm coming in. We had 1,500 bales of hay on the ground. And so I was helping my husband haul the hay in. And my son goes, "Mom, what's over there in the woods?" And I look, and you could see the outline of the Bigfoot and the edge of the woods. They were in enough where you couldn't see all of them, but you could tell they were there, and you could see its eyes. And they're just watching. And when you get closer to that area, it would like step closer to where it's going to come out into the headlights, but not quite. And so I made a couple of rounds getting hay bales. My son kept getting uneasy, so I pulled over, and my husband's like, "What's going on?" And I showed him, and he goes, "Okay." He goes, "I'll do that area. You just, stay up this way," because we didn't want to, scare my son. He was like 3 at the time. And I was back up this way, and then pretty soon he's coming over, and he goes, "Nope, forget it." And I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, I just got a rock thrown at me." And I'm like, "Okay, they threw a rock." And he goes, "No, I got a rock thrown at me." And he held it up, and it was a decent-sized little boulder. And it was like they were warning him to stay out of that area. So he actually did not get the hay in that area. He left it. And I was like, "Well, I guess they just don't want you over there." And he goes, "I guess not." And we left it and went home. And then we went back out the next day, and all you could see, because of how bad the storm was, you could tell something had been standing there, but you couldn't tell any real footprints or anything. But you could tell where it was sunk in from something standing. That's the only time I'd ever had anything it wasn't even toward me, it was towards him. And I think that he might have just got too close for their comfort. And so they chunked a rock at him. I told him, I was like, "Well, I told you, there's Bigfoot around here. Just got to watch them."
And was that before or after his sighting?
After. If you're in South Coffeyville, you're about 15 minutes from the border. Because once you get into Coffeyville is when you hit the border. And it takes about 10, 15 minutes to get up in there. But there's also, if you get into looking to sightings, there's a lot of sightings up in that area. Because the river is one of the best places for them to catch the fish. The Illinois has got some of the best fishing there is.
Okay, the Illinois River. Gotcha. So a lot of sightings along that. Interesting. I will have to look into that for sure. I don't hear a lot from, I'm sure there is, but I've never gotten a lot from that area of Kansas or
well, most people don't talk about it.
Okay.
That's the other thing, is you're taught not to talk about it because people think you're crazy. Like I was taught from an early age, don't go to school talking about any of this because people are going to think you're crazy. If something weird happens, just pass it off. Don't go, "Oh, well, that's a ghost." Or, "Ooh, that was weird." You're taught not to talk of it. So it's just something you're used to. You go out looking for it. Me personally, any chance I get, I'm going to go hunting. I'm going to go look, see if I can find me a ghost or see if I can do something. But most people, they're taught not to acknowledge it. My husband was.
Growing up or over your lifetime, do you ever remember anyone saying, "Hey, I got a photo of Bigfoot, I got a video from a Bigfoot"? I mean, they probably wouldn't have said anything anyways, to be honest. That's what it sounds like.
Unfortunately not. I know my cousin tried one summer. He was dead set on getting one, but he even put trail cams up and everything, but all he got was a bunch of blur and a lot of deer. So I was like, "Well, you're just not in the right spot, I guess." He goes, "No, I'm near that. I'm across from that cave where you sit." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I guess they don't like you." I was just harassing him. Because he was very determined to get a picture, but he never could. Because we had come back and I told him what we'd seen. And so he was like, "I'm going to go see if I can find it." But he was never able to. I know he had some sightings through the years, but photograph-wise, unfortunately, never got to get one.
Gotcha. And
So,
growing up in that area, was there a person where everyone would be like, "Oh, you saw Bigfoot? Go talk to this guy. He's kind of the guy who's into it around here." Nope.
No, it was all, you kept quiet about it.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but it was old timers up in that area, and it was people that had grown up in that area. So it was just, it was common knowledge. It was just common knowledge that they were there. I have family still live up there. I know that they still hear stuff. They still see stuff. I definitely know down in the area where I grew up at, there is people having, hearing the knocks and the whoops and stuff like that. Yes.
It's not an area a lot of people talk. I think everyone's too distracted by Southeast Oklahoma,
Yes. And, if you follow the river, the Illinois comes right up. And then the Grand is up here, and the Grand River, and it all flows right up. Well, actually flows down from all of the lakes, because Grand Lake of the Cherokees flows down into Lake Uchee. Lake Uchee flows down into Lake Hudson. They're all just connected, and everything flows down through the rivers. So it's not very hard to think. If you track it, they can walk, and go from one area to the other during the different times of the year for food, for where the fish are at, where the game's at. It would make sense. Like a natural migration.
Absolutely. The longer I talk to people about this, I find that one of the common factors is it's by a river, and you can just follow the reports up and down. For example, I'm from Iowa. You can just follow the reports up and down the Des Moines River through southeast Iowa. It's incredible. It sounds like it's a very similar thing down there.
Yes, it is. Because if you look at the geography of the area, and then you look at the sightings, there's not a lot of sightings out in the western parts of Oklahoma, because there's not as much river, there's not as much woods. But over in the southeast corner, all the way up to the northeast corner, that's all we are, is river and woods and creeks and lakes, and it's the perfect area for them, because there's also lots of caves. Dripping Springs State Park's over here, and that is a huge state park that has, natural waterfalls, caves, all kinds of stuff. It's the perfect area for them to be.
Did anyone ever see anything that looked like a tall, pale, skinny, creature, just really kind of weird, kind of like if you remember the Lord of the Rings movies, like you had Gollum?
I've never actually watched the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I think the strangest creature we've seen around here would be a skinwalker.
So that could be similar, depending on what your definition is. So what would be your definition of that?
Well, we've traditionally around here, we've got two types from what we call skinwalkers, or I personally. We have a gentleman in Tahlequah, or lives kind of around Tahlequah, that he's said to turn into a bear. And then we have this one that, to me, it's creepy. It's like the top half looks kind of human with antlers and a very creepy face, but the bottom half is like more animal. I've heard stories of people seeing stuff like that, but I just like, oh, well, it must be a skinwalker, and pass it off, because it probably is something to do with that or something.
I've never heard of that before. Especially the deer antlers. Is it usually called labeled as a female or male?
Usually male.
Okay.
What I'd heard. And like I said, I've never personally seen it. I've just heard the stories of it. One of my friends, she is a full-blood Cherokee Indian, and she lives out near Kenwood, Kenwood is pretty much, if you're not Indian, you stay out type area.
Why would you do that?
And she, well, they don't like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got
it.
Yeah. And if they don't like you, you're not going in there. And anyway, she was always told never walk home after dark. Well, and if you walk home after dark, if you hear something behind you, do not turn around. Well, she was walking home after dark. She heard something behind her. Well, she's smart. She didn't turn around, but she held her camera up and took a selfie over her shoulder to try to catch what it was. She described it as a demon. It's pale white, walking on all fours, red eyes, scurrying after her. She made that mile walk in 4 minutes. She was done. She goes, I don't even remember how I got home. And I'm like, well, now we know why they told us not to be out after dark. And it was just in that one area up in there because they said it was really haunted. And it was evil. And this and that. It's what you heard growing up. And then she took this picture. Unfortunately, the phone got broke, so she didn't get to get the picture off.
Right.
But it looked like a pale white creature on all fours. Like it was scurrying.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about right there. Yeah. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, see, I didn't know what they were called. we was told it was a demon.
Okay.
We really didn't know what it was, but that's what her mom had called it.
Oh, wow. And so that's Kenwood, Oklahoma?
Yeah, up around the Kenwood Rose area. Okay. And that's about, from where I live now, it's about 20 minutes.
It's an unincorporated community, it looks like?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't like breaking down out there.
That is, man, that kind of thing makes me want to look into it, but I don't know how far I want to look into it. People there probably not want to talk at all, I would guess.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Unless they reach out, which they're more than welcome to. But yeah, you don't go knocking on doors around there.
No. Not in that area.
No, definitely not. Man, it's been some fun talking to you. It's a fascinating area of Oklahoma. Definitely going to be looking more into this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, get in touch with me anytime. I'm more than happy to go out and help you hunt.
Absolutely. And if you ever run into any other information, if you're able to pull up what you have about...
I will definitely find that and send it to you, because it was, to me, it's... What I found fascinating about it was I remember because when she first gave it to me, I went looking and you can't find anything about it. Like they don't want you to know about it. And so I was like, I'm going to go to the historical societies and I'm going to try to pull, more information that route.
That's where you found it, was the Historical Society.
Well, she found it there.
Oh, she did. Oh, wow.
And she sent it to me. And so I'm going to go back and try, because I have to go to the Historical Society for a grave I'm trying to find. So it won't be a very hard thing for me to look into and try to find more information. If I can't do it that route, then I know there's still some old timers alive from that time that might talk to me, because I've learned here in Oklahoma anyways, once these old timers get to a certain age, they don't care what they tell.
Oh yeah, it's great. It is so good. That is a lesson I've learned myself. You need to figure out where they're at and become friends with them, like buy them coffee or something.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's what I've learned. And I'm like, I'm loving this, because I can find out so much more information from them than I can any historical society half the time.
Absolutely.
And that's actually why I'm relying on to find this grave I'm looking for, is to try to track down some old timers that were alive when this incident, or not when it happened, but they would have been little kids and their parents might have talked about it and try to locate it. And I'm like, ooh, I love these old timers, man. You give them a cup of coffee, you're there for 3 hours learning stuff.
Absolutely. Or the same is with older librarians in a town.
Yes.
And historical societies. I've had luck with them as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. Now while I'm thinking about it, there is up in Uchi, there is a cemetery, and there has been sightings of Bigfoot walking behind the cemetery, and I know they're fairly recent.
Where is this?
Up in Uchi. Which is, it's on if you are south of Grove on Highway 20. Yeah, you take 59 down into J, and then from J, you go like you're going down 59 to Tahlequah, but you turn onto 20, and you go into Uchi. And when you're going into Uchi, there's a huge cemetery on the left-hand side. And there has been, as recent as last year, I know for sure, sightings of Bigfoot behind that cemetery or walking through the back edge of that cemetery.
I'm going to definitely look into that. So as late as last year, you're saying there's been reports in that area. That's cool.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've talked to people that's had, they live up in that area, and they're like, man, we see them all the time. We hear this all the time.
Wow. Well, Mary, thank you so much for spending an hour of your time with me and just sharing some really interesting things of what's going on in this area you're familiar with. And hopefully if people are listening to this and they know of things going on around Uchi and the cemetery and all this, man, there's even a place called Monkey Island near this. How crazy is that?
Okay, so Monkey Island got its name because a circus was coming through and monkeys actually got loose.
Okay, cool.
They captured them, but yeah.
All right.
Yeah, this whole area is, I mean, you ever come down here, you'll have fun.
Yeah, it's as crazy as there's another lake. It's down by Texas. The lake, what's it called? Lake Texoma has a lot of weird stuff like you guys.
Oh yeah, I've drove over that one. That's some cool areas down there. Yeah, fun stuff down there.
They both look like dragons. That's weird when you look.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, man, Mary, thank you so much. Keep me in mind if you ever run into any other weird stuff in your area.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.